All right, well, let's get started. So this is the Sakai Learning Analytics Dashboard session. I'm hoping this will be more of a conversation than a presentation. I'd like to talk about some things that work really well and some things that, frankly, I think need a little bit of help. And so we can have a conversation about that. But I thought I'd sort of start out by telling you just a little bit about me and my background, because it's probably germane here. I've actually done a fair amount of consulting work since 1993. And for example, one of the things that we do is a technology assessment of colleges. And we really believe in this whole idea of analytics and measurement. In fact, we use this sort of continuous improvement cycle that when we talk to people about it, you've got to sort of define your standards and your processes before you can actually establish a measurement system. And then once you've established a measurement system, you can then measure and report on that. And then you can take that data and review it and adjust as necessary and improve things. And the cycle goes around and round and round. And these 2 points over on the side are things that I really believe in. If you can't measure something, then you can't be sure you're improving it. I mean, I put that you can't be sure because it is possible to improve something without measuring it, but you can't be sure. You can't know for sure that you're really doing that. And so I'm really a believer in metrics and measuring. And then secondly, and this is probably even more true, that what gets reported gets attention. If you report on something, then people start paying attention to it. And if you don't report on it, even though it's important, they don't pay as much attention. So those are sort of two things that I believe in, kind of basics that are important, at least to me, just so you know where I'm coming from. I also have been sort of thinking about different kinds of analytics. We use the term audit an awful lot, and when I do a technology assessment, and I deliberately use that word, I don't use the word audit because in my mind, at least, an audit is sort of, it looks backward at what you did in the past, and frankly tries to catch you having done something wrong. Whereas in my mind, at least, an assessment sort of looks at where we are now and says, how are we doing against a standard and where would we like to go? Where we'd like to get, and I don't pretend to be there, is to be able to forecast into the future. If we continue on this track, this may happen. So for example, we'd like to be able to do predictive forecasting about student success. There are indicators now in the present that suggest that in the future, this student may leave our college, may not persist. And so, I'd like to say that we're doing that sort of thing. I can't really say that, but at least I could say we're doing these assessments. In my mind, a traditional approach, thinking now about courses, is that we do these course evaluations, but we do them after the fact. And so we're looking into the past. Basically, the course is over. You know the drill, right? The course is over, and the student either receives an electronic survey, or at least when I was in college, of course, that was a long, long time ago, somebody came into the class with this manila envelope that had the surveys, and the teacher was asked to leave, and the surveys were passed out, and nobody left the room until those surveys were done. But it was all after the fact. The class was done. We were finished with the class, but at least we could do that. And so on this scale here, I've got fewer challenges there. Doing an assessment as you're teaching is more challenging, but in my mind, a lot more valuable. So we sort of have developed this approach that essentially says we want to kind of do a real-time analysis of a few key metrics and create a dashboard for reporting so that we could sort of see how things are going, and possibly, going back to that earlier slide, possibly make adjustments as the class is going on so that we can actually help coach, excuse me, and I'm going to focus on instruction here, coach the instructor in how to engage students better. That was kind of the goal. So we set ourselves a mission of saying we want to measure instructor engagement, not student engagement, but instructor engagement on a weekly basis and report on it and use a web-based dashboard to do that. That was kind of what we set out to do. And so I want to talk about that a little bit, and then we can get into a conversation about the challenges and so forth. So before we talk about dashboards, I really want to tell, if you're not aware of Edward R. Tufte, I highly recommend his work. It's been around for quite a while. This Visual Display of Quantitative Information is a fabulous book. It's really, really important. It's in its second edition, and I had the chance to actually see him speak, and I was just, I really was, I can't say enough good about the work that he's done. He basically says, look, things need to be simple, instantly understandable, you know, use color, use graphics to convey information, and he's a real, he would not like what I have on the screen right now because it has chart junk, you know, extra stuff that really takes away from the main message. He's in fact, he's convinced that the Challenger shuttle disaster was the result of PowerPoint, because the errors that led to the failure of the O-ring, which led to the disaster of the shuttle, were actually in a PowerPoint, which he obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. But it was so cluttered up with other stuff that really nobody paid attention to it. So I like to use Tufte's design concepts when I'm working on dashboards. I've built dashboards for like Volkswagen. Had a nice project with them to actually relay information every month about the used car business across the United States and Canada. You know, some fun projects like that. But I've always kind of thought that Tufte was the guy. And so if you don't know Tufte, I recommend you get his books and read, because I think you'd really be impressed. So when we were thinking about this, what are we going to include in the dashboard? We wanted to keep it simple and straightforward. So these are, on the left-hand side of your screen, are things that the school says, we'd like to check this. This is what we'd like to do. And so, for example, if we're going to measure instructor engagement, we'd like to know, does the instructor check in daily? Okay, that's a good question. Does the instructor answer course emails within 24 hours? So if a student emails the instructor ought to get back to them relatively quickly, within 24 hours. Does the instructor monitor threaded discussion forums daily? Because we know that discussion forums are an important way of engaging students. And finally, does the instructor grade all assignments within 1 week of submission? So at least within a week, an assignment's turned in, there ought to be a grade back out of it. So my job was to sort of translate that into Sakai terminology. So does the instructor check in daily means, does the instructor log into Sakai daily? Okay, we have ways of checking that, and I'll go into that in just a minute here. Does the instructor answer course emails within 24 hours? Well, that might translate, is there a response to each student message within 24 hours? There's a gotcha there, which I'll come back to, but you know, that's basically what we said. Does the instructor monitor threaded discussions forums daily? Well, we'll say, does the instructor access the forums tool daily? And finally, does the instructor grade all assignments within 1 week of submission? We'll say, does the instructor provide a gradebook entry for each student assignment submission within 7 days? So that was how we sort of translated what the school wanted into Sakai terminology, okay? Now, to do this, I need to tell you a little bit. Some of you probably already know this, but just in case, in Sakai, there are 2 tables. One's called the sessions table and one is called the events table, into which, in theory at least, every activity done by users gets recorded. Now, the way it works is this, that when a user first logs in, it creates a new session. So there's a session record. It basically says this particular user who logged on at this particular time, when. So we have information about who logged on and when. And this session gets a number. It's a big, long, cryptic number, but it gets a number. Then, as that user does everything within Sakai, an event record is created. The event basically tells us what they did, where they did it, sometimes how they did it, and these are all tied back to this particular session. So if a user logs on, starts a session, does 10, 15, 20, 100 things, and then logs off, that's one session and 100 different events that are recorded in this table. Now, you're saying, what do those look like? Well, let me show you. That is what the sessions table looks like. Kind of cryptic, and some of you all are very familiar with this perhaps, but others of you may not be. So basically, this is the session number. This is the server that they logged in on, because we're the LAMP consortium. There are several different servers in our cluster, so you can see 216 and 217 seem to be the prevalent ones on this particular screen. I believe this is the user ID. That's their internal Sakai user ID. This is the IP address that they're coming from. This is some information about how they got here and so forth. And this is a personal pet peeve. There's a special character right after this KHTML that forces it into the next column. This is all supposed to be one one batch of text, but this special character here throws it over here. And then finally we have the date. I have to do some special manipulation because you see this one doesn't have that KHTML, so it doesn't have the special character. And so the date is in the right place, but I have to basically move it over here so that I've got a date in the same place for everybody. A little bit of manipulation I have to do. That's neither here nor there. That's just something. But that's what a sessions table looks like. Now, let's look at an events table. So here we have each event gets its own serial number. Here's the date and time that it happened. And this is an important column right here. This tells you what they did. So web content service read. So this user actually read some web content. Here's a user who logged out. Here's a user who read an assignment. Here's a user who read a forums. And you get the idea. You know, it goes on down through here. You can sort of see that. And there's this what they call, brain went blank. What is it called? Context, I think. So this information that's in this column sort of gives you some further information about that. Sometimes there's nothing to say, but sometimes there is something to say. For example, which forum did they read? Well, there's the ID of the forum right there. So you can actually see what it looks like. Additional information here, not sure what it is. Additional information here, not sure what it is. Additional information here, not sure what it is. And somebody who's on here is going to say, you should know that. And boy, I'd love for you to tell me because I've struggled with some of this stuff. But the bottom line is, by tying together, going back to this diagram here, by tying together a session that tells me who's doing it and when they do it, with the event record, I can tell what they're doing, where they're doing it, and how they're doing it. I can sort of piece together a picture of what somebody's doing. So you sort of get that idea here, the sessions, the event. And I want to show you one more thing. This is the event code directory, dictionary that is actually available online. This is for Sakai 2.7. You'll notice that that's not that's not 11, that's 2.7. And I'm going to type in that URL so that you'll have it just in case you want to go take a look at it. It's the last updated one I can find. It was last updated June 25th, 2012. So it's kind of out of date. But it does sort of give me an idea of what's in the event codes that were in this previous file that I was showing you, this column right here, the third column over. Okay, so with all that, here we go, with all that, basically what we did was we took the sessions and the events data from Sakai and we built some scripts that extract that data. We call it the analytics engine, and it's got a name of Soleil, supporting online engagement. Yeah, okay, thanks, Jennifer. You use the events to track users to help instructors researching student access or submission. Yes, exactly. That's the kind of thing that ought to be able to happen with this, because the promise of this data is great. You know, here's Sakai with all this good data. We need to extract it and do stuff with it. So you did something different with it, Jennifer. I did this. We basically extracted this data and produced a web-based dashboard. We also, by the way, email the dashboard to the instructor and to the dean, by the way, just so you know. So this data it's done outside of Sakai. We just basically suck this data out, and here's what it looks like, just so you can see. We try to use color codes. So a green color code means meets the standards of the university. A yellow means marginal, and red means doesn't meet. A blank one means there wasn't anything. So for example, Kwashe Falana here in this particular week, there were no emails from students to respond to. So there's, you know, he doesn't, there's no strike on him for not responding to that. But you can tell that by looking at this, you can quickly get an idea of who might be having a problem and who's, you know, so for example, Nancy Blaine here, doing really well, you know, meeting all the criteria. Got a little bit of a problem here. So, you know, okay, it's the same instructor, 2 different courses. You know, I might want to go have a conversation about that if I was the dean and so forth. That's the idea is, you know, while you're teaching this class, make an adjustment so that you really can engage with students, because at the end of an online course, you're done and it's too late for those guys. You can maybe do something better for the next folks that are coming along. Did I hear a question? Okay. You feel free to interrupt me and ask. I want to point out that online, if you click on this, you can get a little more information. So for example, here's this yellow overall engagement. Remember, that means logs in. So didn't log in on Sunday, did log in on Monday once, didn't on Tuesday, twice on Wednesday, none on Thursday, once on Friday, none on Saturday. kind of tells me that at least there's probably a pattern here of logging on 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That might be okay, but my standard says you got to log on 5 days a week to get a green dot. So, you know, maybe we ought to have a conversation about that. It's just one of those things. And just as another example, here's an email. So number of emails written by students, 13. Number of instructor email responses, 8. That's a 62% response rate. Not good enough. We're looking for 80%. Well, we're looking for 100% to get green, and we're looking for 80% to get yellow. So I can get some ideas of what the user is doing. When I say user, I mean the instructor is doing, and make adjustments as we go. Now, let me stop for a second and see what comments and questions and responses y'all have so far. Or are you just like, let's just get this over with, let's go home? Do you require all communication through Sakai to pull the email data? Great question, Sean, and the answer is yes, it has to be that way. I cannot track email that does not come through Sakai. And so that was one, I mean, there, you probably recognize there are a lot of political issues around this, and one of them is just that. For us to be able to measure how responsive you are on email, all email transactions have to be done through Sakai, through the messages tool. Can we get everybody to do that? It's hard. So that's why some of these are red, frankly. Good question. Other questions? How integrated is this with Sakai? Well, I won't say particularly. I'll go back to this screen here. So here's Sakai over on the left-hand side of the screen, and basically these files are huge. I process about 1.3 million records in the events file every week. So it's a bunch of data that gets extracted, and you know, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. We're looking for specific data points that we can process and produce these dashboards. So it's not terribly integrated, and I don't think you'd want it to be because the files are so huge. Do standards rules have to be adjusted for the type of class and modality? Also a good question. We have not done that. What we've done is on a school by school basis, it can be. So for example, going back here, at one school, the standard may be that you need to log on 5 days a week. At another school, it may be 4 days a week. Another school, it may be 7 days a week. But it's not a modality by class, it's by school. Yes, and the Redshift database can feed this kind of query. That's exactly right. And can the dashboard results be displayed to instructors within their Sakai sites? We have not tried that, Allison. That's a good question. We've not gone that route, but that would be really nice, wouldn't it? Now the next question is, should the students see it too? I recognize that you might be stepping on political landmines here. The Soleil dashboard basically extracts data from Redshift and then processes it. I'll be honest, it's a little bit cumbersome. We do it every Monday morning at 6 a.m. Because we basically want to capture the previous week's worth of work. And so Monday, you know, by about mid-morning, it's finished processing. By mid-morning, on Monday, they get their dashboards, they get their emails. So, yeah, good question. So here are some things that kind of bug me. I said what's working and what's not. And I'd like to get you all's thoughts on this to sort of tell me, am I off the beam here? Is this right? First of all, the event code dictionary documentation is out of date. That's this document right here. It does not include everything that I think is actually in the events file. I think there are events that are not documented. Now, you know, they should be, and perhaps I should be the one who does that and try to figure out what they are. But just to point out that this is a documentation for 2.7 written back in 2012, that tells me there's probably some things out of date. So that's one issue that I've got. There's some information in the event code file table that I don't know what it means. Some of you all may. So here's the events table again. I don't understand what all this is telling me here. I mean, it looks really juicy, but I don't understand you know, what it means. If I'm looking at content read, so it's content attachment, that's a course name. I recognize that as a course name. It's in the assignments. Okay, that's helpful. That's probably the name of the, that's probably the name of the assignment, and this is probably the name of the document. That's useful information. Jennifer, was it Jennifer who was saying something about that earlier, that you know, you probably are doing those kinds of queries to dig into that sort of thing. Did they read this document? I don't totally understand what this column does. I don't know what this code here, it's always M or A. And I'm clueless about this too. So there's some information here that I don't know what it means. And so I'd love to know that. You know, that's another thing that I'd kind of like to understand. Here's a big one. Data logging is incomplete. Some processes just don't log anything to the event table at all. And so, you know, there are some things that you can't test for because there's no logging of that. That's particularly true, and I understand why it would be true of contrib tools. But in the session that I did just before this one, we were talking about standards, and it seems to me that one of the standards ought to be that if you're going to contribute a tool, you will log to the event table when users do important things with that tool, so that we can grab that data and parse it. Yeah, that's a good question, Pat. Who is responsible for updating the dictionary? We're an open source community. I think the answer has to be us. We all are. Okay, Magdalene says A is for access and M is for maintain, but let me go back here because some of these are not project sites. These are course sites. So I'm not sure. That's a good theory, but I'm not sure that it's right, because I know that many of these are course, like I know that's a course site, not a project site. I know that's a course site, not a project site. Here's another one down here. So I don't know. Good question. All right. So the fact that data logging is incomplete is perhaps a big one. And then here's another one, and this is more this is something I'd really like to have, but I recognize that it's difficult. I assumed it was there when I started working on this project, and found to my chagrin that it does not. Here's the scenario. I referred to this earlier. A student writes an email to a professor, and yes, we do it through the messages tool, so we're able to capture that in the events table. Student writes an email to the professor. The professor responds to that email. Good for the professor. What I don't know from the events table is which email did the professor respond to. So an email response does not say which email was responded to. It just says that an email was responded to. Same's true of an assignment grade. It doesn't tell you which assignment was graded. It just tells you that an assignment was graded. And so I cannot tie together an email and a response. So one of these questions that was asked by the school originally, does the instructor answer course emails within 24 hours? I honestly can't do that because I don't know which email is being responded to. All I can tell you is that an email was responded to, and thus we get, like I showed you here, all I can do is give you a percent. There were 13 emails from students and 8 responses from the instructor. I'd be kind of looking for 13 responses to 13 emails, but who knows? Maybe 8 responses was perfectly sufficient for 13 emails, or maybe these 8 responses were all to one email, leaving 12 people unresponded to. I can't tell that in Sakai. All I can do is develop this percent ratio, which in my mind isn't really that good. So those are my pet peeves. How about the rest of you? And Pat and I have talked about this before. Standards like Caliper and XAPI can be applied, and these standards are much more specific as the content required for each event. And so, yeah, the promise is there. We've just got a ways to go before we get there. Did I hear somebody else have a question? Okay, y'all are being very quiet. So that means either I've completely buffaloed you, or you're like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Okay, let's see what Dean has to say here. One email response might address multiple similar emails from students. That's right. That's exactly right. And I don't have a way of knowing that. So is one email from an instructor basically fine for 13 emails from students, or is it not nearly good enough? And the student emails thanks, and the instructor has an email that says, you have to say you're welcome. I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you. And now we're sort of getting into the dirty little secrets of metrics that maybe just simply saying did they respond is not good enough. And we end up with things like gaming the system so that I say you're welcome and the student says okay, and I say well okay back at you because I've got to make sure that I respond to every single email, even though at some point it becomes a little bit ridiculous. Yeah, and there is certainly the email cutoff, because we're looking at a week at a time. I actually worried about that there were emails that came in on Sunday and then got responded to on Monday, and so the instructor got dinged for the previous week, didn't respond to those 5 emails, and then somehow was excessive in their email responses the following week. Yeah, I'm totally with that, and I think we were just sort of willing to live with that one on how we were doing it. So yeah, it's I hear you, Karen. It's a really good question, and there are lots of things we kind of went, well, I guess we'll have to live with that. Yeah. So should Sakai events be standardized with XAPI? Good question. I don't know enough. Pat's the expert on XAPI. I don't know enough about XAPI to say whether that's where we really ought to be heading or whether that's sort of too much. Pat, can you turn on your microphone and give that a thought? Oh, found issues with the XAPI provider. Okay. Oh, okay. Never mind. Thanks, Pat. I appreciate it. Okay. So here's a question. Do instructor analytics supplant or augment student analytics? That's a wonderful question, and I think that deserves some conversation. In my mind, they do not supplant. They certainly augment. This particular school that sort of initiated this project was wanting to look particularly at instructor engagement because they had other means of looking at student engagement. But there's no reason to think that this same approach couldn't be used for student analytics. And so if we go back to my way earlier chart here, one of the things we really would like to be able to do is forecast that a student is at risk. Here's the classic example. I've got a student who signed up for an online class and they logged in once and they haven't logged in since. That's probably not a good indicator that this student is going to be successful in this class, and I ought to be reaching out to that student now. So that falls under the room with under the idea of sort of student analytics. This particular school wanted to look particularly or focus particularly on analytics for instructor engagement, thinking that if they could make sure that the instructors were doing what they should be doing to engage the students, that would help with the students as well. And they had other means of measuring student engagement. So it's a very good question, and I don't know that. Yeah, it's
one.
Go ahead.
One of the things that we're working towards here at Point University is I guess we're on the front end of developing, tracking our instructors, and in our case, particularly it's their involvement in a course in association with they've gone through they've gone through a faculty mentorship program. Mm-hmm. And so tracking data versus how they performed in the faculty mentorship program. And so we've kind of are currently in the stage of picking the events that we want to do, and I've currently got SQL query written that'll pull the context event date and the user's email address, because that's what we use as their identifier.
Yeah.
And so we're working on refining that information. And then what we'll probably end up doing to kind of get a measure for engagement is we'll either, the event types that we decide on, will either count all of those for an instructor in a particular course, or we'll count it by event or something along those nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get into some interesting stuff here where you start thinking about, do I want to count this by course or do I want to count this for the instructor? And the answer to that question is sort of yes. It kind of depends, sometimes it makes sense to do it one way and sometimes it does another. So going back to those 4 metrics, does the instructor check in daily? That's a Sakai wide thing. Did they log into Sakai? That's all I need to know. And I can pull that out of the sessions table alone. I don't need events for that. But these other 3, I do have to have the events because that's where it's, specifically, did they do something with email? Did they do something with forums? Did they do something with the gradebook? And so for those, I need the events file. Yeah. So, okay, let's see. Pat says, we've also been doing some query of grades directly from gradebook data to give feedback early in the semester to advisors. Yeah, there you go. That's another thing. I mean, this whole idea of sort of pulling data in advance and forecasting is, I think this is where we all need to be going. We don't need to be looking back. That was in the old days and that was easier. Now we need to be, stretching ourselves to go forward and look forward. And if we can get to the point where we're doing predictive analysis, of course, then we get into, y'all seen the movie Minority Report? Tom, what was his name? Who was the star in that one? I can't remember all of a sudden. But he was arrested because he was probably going to commit a crime in the future. And so, that's like, ooh, I'm not sure I want to go there. Tom Cruise, thank you. That's right. Tom Cruise, that's right. Okay. Well, any other comments before I let you go? There's no need to hang on to you at the end of the day. I mean, I think we're all kind of like, whew, it's been a long day and we've taken in a lot of stuff. Okay, well, if you want to continue the conversation, that's me. I'd be happy to chat because I like to talk about this stuff. Here's an email, and I'll put that in the chat too. And also, let me remind you that the virtual conference has the forums set up. Wilma has done a lovely job of setting up these forums, so you can actually go in here and actually engage in a discussion with other people if you want to, as well as download these slides. I've already uploaded the slides, so you can get those. But it's there for you to use if you want to continue the conversation after this is over. All right. Can some student interventions be automated effectively? That's another good question. I'm going to give you a personal opinion about that. I feel like those kinds of interventions are not the best things to be handled automatically. They really need to be handled with the human touch. That's just my feeling. But at least you could, it's very conceivable to me that you could get a dashboard that says, here are some students who are at risk. You probably ought to be talking to these students, and I would use that list to say, all right, I'm going to use this as my list to go track down some students and say, what's going on in your life? What's happening? Why are you not attending class? What can we do to help? I think that ought to be done more humanely and humanly than automated, but that's just a personal opinion. Okay, folks. Well, I think I'm going to let you go, and I appreciate you all being so interactive with this. It's been very nice to have a conversation instead of just talking to a computer camera. So thanks, everyone. Great to talk to you.